Greetings and welcome to our weekly Sunday Sit. This is a time for meditation and community to come together. This event is set up by the residents of the Monastic Academy, which is a program of the Center for Mindful Learning. Please feel free to use the bathroom, move around, or sit on the floor during the talk, guided meditation, and Q&A with our teacher, Soryu.
Past several weeks, we've been talking about the name of the community that we're creating here. It's a little bit of a long name that's somewhat confusing, perhaps, but I think it's worth learning. At least a few people know the meaning of it, and then everyone else can just say the acronym that need not have any meaning, which is CEDAR, CEDAR. And that, as far as anyone needs to know, just is the name of a very nice tree. I really like the cedar tree. It's a beautiful tree. There, you can see it right there through the window. I don't know if the camera can see through there, but those are cedar trees, and they have a lot of very nice, very interesting characteristics. Those of us, though, who want to can learn the meaning of each of the words that go with CEDAR. And right now we're on the letter D. So the full phrase, the full name is the Community for the Experience and Development of Awakening and Responsibility. Each of those words has significant meaning, carries a great deal of significance. And so I'm spending a few months talking about that. And last week we talked about development from a certain perspective. And this week we'll talk about it a bit more. One way of understanding development is that we want to create structures by which we can more effectively experience awakening and responsibility. Now, awakening is a spiritual experience. Responsibility is what you might think of as a mundane experience. Awakening means that we see things as they are, and responsibility means that we do the right thing. It means that we are able to care for ourselves and others, in fact, for all living things. So awakening is fundamentally the ability to be honest, or you could say to not be delusional. And responsibility is fundamentally the ability to be caring, or you could say to not be self-centered in our actions. So one of the important things that we take the word development to mean, the experience and development to mean is that we find better and better ways of walking this path. We want to walk this path more and more efficiently so that we can move on it more and more effectively, so that more and more people can continue on this journey, overcoming suffering for ourselves and others, and awakening to truth and joy. We want to create things that allow that. Now, there are a lot of different things we might create. We might create a community, for example, like this. We might create a culture within that community so that we can trust each other more, so that we can practice the path in deeper, more consistent, richer, more beautiful ways. We want to also create other structures, for example, the schedule. So we have a weekly schedule. We meet here every week. That schedule is something that we can depend on. It's something we can use in order to effectively practice. If we take this schedule very seriously, which isn't required, but if we chose to, then we would come every week, regardless of other commitments. And in that way, we would be creating a structure in our lives that would establish the importance of this path and of this community. And to the extent that we do that, we are creating significant change in the world. Because one of the most important questions that we can ask is, what do we prioritize? When push comes to shove, what is most important to us? And that's determined by and measurable within our actions. So one thing we can do is take the structure of the schedule very seriously, and in that way create an enacted and embodied prioritization of this path, of this community. We could take that even more seriously and not only come whether we have other things to do or not, but come whether we want to or not. And this is a big shift for people, especially in our culture, to do something whether we want to or not, because for us, what we want to do is generally taken to be the most important thing in the world. If we're not allowed to do what we want to do, then that's considered to be actually unjust. A good world is one in which people can do what they want to do. That's what freedom is. That's what fairness is. That's what goodness is. But with this path, we actually prioritize it over what we want. We prioritize community over what we want. We prioritize truth over what we want. We prioritize love and friendship over what we want. And we see that the point of what we want is one of our most fundamental addictions, or you could say masters. So while for most of us, we think to be able to do what I want is proof that I'm free, on the contrary, to always do what we want is proof that we're enslaved. It's proof that we are not free, because we have a master who we always have to obey, namely our desires. So this this structure can be placed in a higher priority than our desires, than our wants, and our hopes. And in that way, the structure allows us to move on the path even more quickly and more deeply. But there are other structures we can create as well. There are other ways we can develop things that allow us to awaken and love, be friends. Maybe those are rosary or mala, beads that we use. It's a kind of technology that we would use in order to move on the path. Something that's been discovered in mostly the East, but something that we're discovering as well nowadays in the West, is that the posture of one's body is a kind of technology, is a structure that allows us to walk the path. The structure of our body, the posture of our body, the position of our body changes the state of our minds. The culture that seems to have most fully understood this is the Indian culture. And that also, I believe, not coincidentally, but it's very much correlated, and I think this is the cause of that. It's because there it's so fully understood that the posture of our body is one of the most important aspects of a spiritual path. Nowadays, we have the opportunity to create other forms of technologies. Nowadays, we have companies that make relatively inexpensive EEG headsets that we hope, as time goes on, become better and better at enabling us to practice. They may reflect our practice back to us so that we can understand how we're doing. They may even act as a kind of a teacher or coach, providing us with perhaps some kind of useful instruction. Maybe there are other kinds of technologies. A form that I'm interested in is simply one that would measure one's breathing. I put something around your abdomen and it measures your breathing. I think that there would be a lot of useful information that would come out of that. And again, that might be a way of developing things that enable us to awaken, to care for ourselves and others more effectively. We reviewed a good deal of this last week, but right now I'd like to talk about another aspect of development. I hope that all of us are engaged in creating these structures, creating systems that encourage the walking of this path, the integration of awakening and responsibility. Simply by coming, we're doing that. Coming to this event, either in person or online. But there's an internal development as well. There's a kind of internal development that matters as well. And that internal development is, put simply, that whatever insight we've had, whatever clarity we've found, that is what we vow to overcome. That's what we work to discard. So one way that I talk about awakening and responsibility is I say that basically, as we walk this path, we're working on two things: getting stuff done and letting stuff go. Get stuff done and let stuff go. That's really what we're trying to do. So getting stuff done is the responsibility side. And what is it that we want to get done? Well, good things. That's what. It's pretty simple, actually. If you think that something's the right thing to do, do it. There it is. That might seem like such a simple statement that it has no meaning or significance, but actually, in my experience, if we decide that my goal is to stop doing the things that I'm doing that I don't believe in, and that I'm not, and to start doing the things that I'm not doing but I do believe in, if that's what we try to do, then in my experience, we can work on that every day for decades and still have a long way to go. If we set that standard, then we find ourselves up against the wall or at the end of our rope, and we're not sure how to move forward. And that's at that point, up against the wall or at the end of our rope, it's at that point, the spirituality, that this path matters, that it gains the most traction. So we hold that as our standard of responsibility. We do things that we believe are the right thing to do. We stop doing things that we believe are the wrong thing to do. We work on that every day of our lives. What about letting stuff go? We know that what do we want to get done? Well, get good stuff done. Don't do anything else. Only do good things. Do no other things. Well, that's a very high standard, but it's something worth working towards. What about letting stuff go? What do we want to let go? We want to let go of our insights. We want to let go of our convictions. Let go of our beliefs. What we believe is right and wrong, good and bad. Whatever we're most clear about, that's what we want to let go of. That's what we work on going beyond. Because that's the limit of our understanding. So if we're going to deepen our understanding, well, then naturally that's what we go beyond. If you want to explore this world and you've only ever been in this room and you've explored everywhere out to the walls, you want to explore beyond that, then the way you do it is you see if there's any way to go further in a certain direction than the walls allow you to go. And if you search and search, you may find that there's a different part of the wall that we might call a door. And who knows, there might be a way to open that door. And you work on that, and if you find out there's a way, then you can walk out of it. So the limit of our understanding is naturally what we want to go beyond. So whatever it is that we have seen most clearly, we want to go beyond that. A few simple points are if you believe in God, for example. Let's say that you're a person who's realized that God is the truth. Yes? Thank you. No problem. Thanks. I appreciate it. Say that we've realized that there is God, and we have a clear conviction that there is God. Then what do we want to go beyond? We want to go beyond that conviction and see clearly beyond the belief that there's God. We want to practice so that the belief in God is taken from us. Let's say that we believe there is no God. Let's say that we think, no, there's no God. I'm a secular, modern person. I'm smarter than those old-fashioned, superstitious people who think that there's God. Then you have to go beyond that. You have to practice so that the belief that there is no God is taken from you. That belief, there is no God, that's taken away. Let's say that you're agnostic. Well, then you want to go beyond agnosticism. These are the challenges that we could discuss if we're talking about God in particular. But actually, each of us has our own specific form of conviction, of belief, what we're certain about, our standpoint. And it's whatever standpoint we have, whatever our convictions are, that's what we're attempting to let go of. Now, that could be any number of things. Of course, that could be some kind of identity. This is my identity. I'm this kind of a person. How can we let go of that identity? It could be some connection to a story from the past. How can we let go of that story? And it may seem as if it's easy, you just let go of it. Now, what's the big deal? But again, as we're working on development, we're working on integrating awakening and responsibility. And what most of us find as we start losing our convictions is that it becomes very difficult to continue to behave in responsible ways because we have no standpoint from which to launch ourselves into a good direction. It becomes very difficult. So if we believe that there's God and then that belief is lost, that's a very difficult situation to be in. For just as an example, there's a very clear correlation between fundamentalist religion in our country, generally fundamentalist Christianity, and alcoholism. The rates of alcoholism are measurably and consistently, correlation is excellent, higher. Alcoholism rates are higher in states where there's less fundamentalism, where religion is less prominent. So Vermont, of course, has very low levels of fundamentalist religion, again, for our country, particular Christianity, and very high levels of alcoholism. There's a clear inverse relationship there. So if you have someone who has found God and has therefore become able to stop drinking, then you can just be kind of glib about it and say, well, now you're practicing spirituality, so why don't you just go beyond the belief in God? It's going to be very difficult to continue to stay away from alcohol if it's as simple as that, if that's all it is. But actually, that's not what it is. It's not merely that we're discarding something. It's that we're awakening to something deeper than that. And the Buddha, when he talked about this, he said that it's actually very clear if you're awakening. Whether you're awakening or not is absolutely clear, because if you are, then wholesome qualities, for example, that you don't drink alcohol, increase. That's how you know. It's simple. How often do you lie? How often do you deceive people? If you're moving on the path of awakening, well, then you're going to do that less and less. That's how you know. It's actually quite measurable. And so the sense of doing good is a way of, or the practice of doing good is a way of measuring the practice of letting go. In the same way, as we do good more and more, we become able to let go more and more fully because we trust ourselves more deeply. And the only reason that we don't let go is that we don't trust ourselves. We don't believe that we would continue to act in good ways if we let ourselves do whatever we wanted to do. We wouldn't care for ourselves, we wouldn't care for others. That's our belief because that's our experience of our own behavior. We find that because I hold back, because I force myself to do good things, I do good things. But as we discover the enjoyment, the rejoicing that comes from doing good, then we realize that that isn't true. I like being caring, being friendly more than I like being hurtful. And so I can be free. It's okay to be free. So the point about development in this particular case is that we're trying to discover how exactly do we let go? How do we let go beyond what we've realized? Nowadays, there are many, many people. It's actually very interesting. It's something that I find quite fascinating about where we're at in our country right now. Where we're at actually in the West. It isn't just the United States. It's more or less the entire European colonial sphere, especially places where white people went and directly brought the residues of European culture. In those areas, there's an enormous tendency for people to spring up who make claims of full awakening. I am fully awakened. I'm completely realized. To the point nowadays that to me, it's actually quite strange that people say I'm fully realized. And also I experience a great deal of greed and hatred and delusion. But this is what full realization is. I embody full realization. I'm it. I'm what you're looking for. I'm what I was looking for. I'm it. Whatever I am, that's the supreme. This is very common. We see it a lot. When I talk about development, this is exactly what I'm referring to as the thing we're trying to break through. The sense of this is what I've realized. I've had this experience. I've come to this understanding, and this is it. This is the truth. From my perspective, the belief that this is it is one of the most significant enemies in the life of a spiritual practitioner. That mindset, I have found it, I know it, this is the end, is something for each of us to be wary of, but not something that we can totally discard, because according to many traditions, there is such a thing as that experience. Such an experience seems to exist. There seems to be such a thing as full awakening. I'm not saying right now that there is no such thing as that. Simply saying that we have to be very wary of our own belief that I've found it, I've got it. And furthermore, the sense I am fully awakened, that as a belief, as a conviction, I'd say is one of the most common symptoms of a person who is not. And so that can be very helpful for us. If we find that that's arising in us, then we have an excellent clue that perhaps we have further to go. If we were, then I wouldn't see the purpose of having a thought like that. We wouldn't need to have that thought. There would be no use for it. But if we're not, then there seems to be quite a use for it. Makes us feel better. And so we can become addicted to that. When I talk about development, I'm referring to the fact that this path may be more vast and more deep than we have as of yet imagined. A lot of the people who I'm referring to, who talk about how deeply awakened they are, uh, often have experienced very important aspects uh, of of what I would call samadhi, aspects of it. But it's not that they haven't experienced it. It's not that they're not experiencing it. It's that there's a much deeper way to experience that. It's not that they haven't had the experience. There are certain characteristics of experience that in Buddhism are called the jhanas. And um, yeah, so there are four jhanas in terms of the Buddhist way of looking at things. And the jhanas then lead you to a level of awareness that can ultimately culminate in awakening. Um, a lot of the people, the trend in Western Buddhism is for people to practice and practice and practice, and then experience a relatively shallow version of the jhanas, of one of the jhanas, and then call that awakening. So this is amusing in two ways. One is that it's very unusual to have even experienced one of the jhanas in the deepest way that one can. It's unusual to have even experienced depth in one of the jhanas. But furthermore, that experience of a shallow experience of the jhana is then taken not only to, it isn't merely that it's mistaken for a deep experience of the jhana, it's taken to be awakening, which is at a completely different level than jhana is in any case. So I know that a lot of this is a little bit technical, so sorry to be going down this road, but just to give a bit of background, in classical Buddhism, there are four jhanas. There are four levels of deep, deep awareness. And there also just happen to be four levels of awakening, four different levels of enlightenment. And nowadays, it's interesting to watch mostly American Buddhists linking up those and thinking that I've experienced this thing and that must be awakening. And now I experience this, and that's an even deeper level of awakening. This, and even deeper this, and then this is final awakening. If we inculcate, if we manage to bring into our hearts an awareness of continuing development, then it becomes exciting to realize that, oh, good news, this isn't awakening. This is merely jhana. This is merely deep awareness. How exciting. That means that the path goes even further than I've experienced. Oh, good news. This isn't even deep jhana. This is just shallow. What I've experienced is just a shallow experience. It could go deeper than this, and then beyond that, there could be awakening. How exciting. That's the shift we want. We want to fundamentally shift from grasping on, fundamentally finding satisfaction and grasping on to an identity associated with having a certain kind of experience and thinking, look at me, I'm awakened, to an excitement about walking on the path itself. That there's more enjoyment in walking on the path than there is in acquiring an identity of someone who has walked the path. If that happens, then all of those technical details become useful. It becomes useful to know about the technicalities of samadhi and jhana or dhyana. And it's hard to translate these words, but they mean deeper and deeper levels of awareness that are more and more full and more precise, more and more accurate. We're seeing things more and more accurately and more fully. Those technicalities become very interesting to us because they're helping us along the path. They stop being decorations that our ego can grab onto and accumulate. So for me, my experience of this has been one of being taught this lesson again and again, and without a lot of sympathy, without a lot of gentleness. So in Asia, as I was training, I again and again thought that I'd had a really deep experience of awakening. Was very certain about it and was angry, actually. Lost faith in the teachers when they wouldn't confirm it. What's wrong with these people? They don't see clearly. That must be the problem. Because they don't see my depth and my true awakening, my true enlightenment. And so this old men don't really understand my truth. And they had, in a way that I think in the West we try to be kind to each other, which I think is good. We're not very mature about this sort of thing. So I think we have to treat each other a little bit with kid gloves. Isn't that a phrase? Gentleness, sort of. Oh, it's okay. You're doing good. But they didn't treat me that way. It wasn't even that they treated me in a mean way. They just weren't interested. It was clear that I was not interesting. It wasn't fun to talk to me. There was really nothing to talk about. You're doing fine. You know, you got a long ways to go. So see you tomorrow. It would have been actually better if they had been angry or something and told me I was arrogant or something. They just weren't interested. They just thought it was so immature that no, you just get on. Okay, I have more important things to do than talk to you about this. And that was, as I say, there was really no sympathy there. There was no interest in comforting me. And that happened again and again and again, dozens of times, I think, from lots of different people. And my experience of it was one of starting to feel confident that I was coming to the end of the path, only to then have to question if I had even started the path. Have I even begun? Have I gotten anywhere? Have I perhaps wasted the past 10 years of my life? I feel like I'm getting somewhere, but then I realize I'm not, and then it's an experience of self-doubt, and this experience of insecurity, experience of sadness often. As many of you know, I had a little corner hidden away in a dark part of one of the monasteries where I trained, which is just where I would go to cry when I again realized I was not making very good progress on this path. And I think one of the dangers of me telling the story, and I don't really like to dissuade you from believing this, but I think it's important that I do, though I'd prefer not to. But I think it's useful anyway, it's not that I wasn't having deep experiences. Relative to many people who claim to have deep experiences, I was having very deep experiences. It's just that I was also with real teachers who could show me that this path goes beyond that. Much, much further than that. And that those experiences, while they are legitimately deep and true, are not what this is all about. To just have a deeper experience is not what this is about. It's not about acquiring a new and better way of looking at things. It's not about being able to experience something better than you used to be able to experience. It's not about that. It's All of that's important. We go through all that. We experience jhana, samadhi, we experience all of that. But then there's something beyond all of that that has nothing to do with acquisition, that has nothing to do with having had a better experience and fixed ourselves so that we can be better than we used to be. It has nothing to do with that. Now, all of that's important, all of that's significant. But when we talk about development, what we're talking about is losing track of everything that we think, everything that we believe, everything that we want, everything that we hope, everything that we fear. Actually dropping, shedding, discarding, throwing away, abandoning all of it. And however much we've moved through, that's wonderful. And we take that as the next exciting limit to pass beyond. Again, until we get to the point when no longer are we fundamentally doing this so that I can become a better person who has better experiences. And it simply becomes an excitement and a joy in taking the next step on the path. Walking the path becomes more interesting than accumulating an identity. This is the significance of development. This is what development is. So we're interested in development as opposed to acquisition. And today, as we practice, we'll have a chance to explore this. Take a moment to establish a posture that's comfortable and relaxed, and also tall, and helps you to be alert. And bring your attention to your breathing, experimenting with different ways of breathing until you find the kind of breath that allows you to be comfortable, relaxed, and alert. And once you've found that way of breathing, breathe in that way 5 times in a row. 5 inhale, exhale cycles. Breathe in the way that you've found that allows you to be most comfortable, relaxed, and alert. And once you've come to the end of those 5 cycles, make a change in how you're breathing. Find a new way of breathing that's even more comfortable, relaxed, even more deeply allows you to be alert. Find a change you can make to your breathing that has those effects. Continue to experiment with your breathing. And once you've found a different way of breathing that allows you to be even more comfortable, relaxed, and alert, practice that for 5 cycles. 5 inhale, exhale cycles. And now consider, is it true? Did that new style of breathing allow you to be more comfortable, relaxed, and alert? Allow you to experience more pleasure? Allow you to experience more tranquility? Did it allow you to experience more energy? Consider that. Whatever the answer is a good answer. It's good to know. Sometimes the changes we make help and sometimes they don't. And in any case, now we'll do the same thing. Find yet another way of breathing that's even more effective than either of the past 2 that we just used. Find another way of breathing. And again, the interest, the emphasis, the excitement in the practice can move from, I know how to breathe in a way that makes me comfortable, relaxed, and alert, to, what would a different way be that would be even better? Where we place our trust, where we search for satisfaction, changes from, I'm the sort of person who knows something, to, wow, what could this be? That's the challenge of this exercise. So search, find interest and fascination in the next step, rather than finding consolation in the last step. What would the next step be? What would be another way to breathe? Giving us more comfort, more relaxation, more alertness, more pleasure, more tranquility, more energy. What would that be? Experiment and explore.
And once you've found that, practice it for 5 breath cycles. And in our remaining few minutes of this first half of the meditation session, move through that process one more time.
explore, discover, practice. For the next 5 minutes, after I ring the bell, we'll practice an optional period of walking meditation. You can continue with the exploration and practice of breathing that allows you to be comfortable, relaxed, and alert, or you can shift to what sort of walking allows you to experience that. You can try walking at different speeds, balancing on your feet in different ways, bringing your steps and your breaths into accordance, and experiment however you'd like, or you can simply continue to sit. In any case, continue to explore, discover, and practice. In order to put the emphasis on the journey, on the next step, rather than on the location or the last step. And bring your attention back to your breathing. Pay attention to your breathing for a few minutes to experience it just as it is. Bring your exploration to your breathing. For this next exercise, it's very important to directly experience your breathing. This next exercise has a tendency to lead us to thinking about our experience of breathing rather than experiencing breathing. So begin by carefully bringing your attention to your breath so that you're experiencing breathing as opposed to thinking about your experience of breathing. It's important to be able to make this distinction in order to practice this next exercise. So spend some time exploring that distinction. An imprecise but extremely useful way of making this delineation is that thoughts about your breath are things you can see or hear in your mind, whereas the experience of breathing is something that you can feel in your body. And with that established, make the following exploration. Ask the question, perhaps with your mind, where is my breath? And be sure to answer that question directly. Sure that the answer is a direct experience and therefore, in all likelihood, something that you feel in your body. Explore that. Where is my breath? Where is it? And find an answer to that question. Ask it and also answer it. In all likelihood, you'll ask it with your mind. See if it's possible to answer it with your body. And once you find an answer, explore it for 5 breaths. And now, challenge yourself. Now that you've found that answer, you found an answer. How can you ask the question again and go beyond that answer? So that an even more accurate answer can be found by discarding attachment to the answer we just found. how to ask the question again and find an even more accurate and complete answer. Beware as you do this of descending into your mind. It's easy to imagine a clever answer that's transcendent and right. Try to set that aside so that this isn't an imaginary answer. It's an answer that we find through direct experience in our bodies. Where is my breath? Where is this breath? Where is it? 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 Once you find an answer, explore it for 5 breaths. if you'd like, move through that process one more time. This is a time for conversation and discussion, questions, answers, reports. This is your time, so feel free to use it as you wish.
I found that the first part of the first exercise for a good chunk of the time, I was just unable to focus on pretty much anything at all. And I realized, oh, I'm feeling really tired. I should stand up.
Great.
And it wasn't so much a change in breath
Right.
until I walked over here. And it's like, oh, wow, now that I don't have the sun beating down on the back of my neck and back and just heating me up, it became about a million times easier. It's like, I can do this now.
Yeah, right.
I wonder if walking over here to the shade can do it. And
Yeah.
it got easier still.
Yeah, right.
So, and then I got time to walking. Let's see. I'm pretty sure it's going to be worse if I go out into the sun, but maybe not being inside will make it not as bad. And sure enough, it was not as good being in the sun as it was being in the shade inside. It gave me an opportunity to go. It was better than being in the sun inside.
Right.
It gave me an opportunity also to go to the shade outside. That's the same as the shade inside, I found.
Perfect. This is exactly what the exercise is all about. Of course, you're talking about changes to something other than your breath, but that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. We want to make all sorts of different adjustments and be able to make different kinds of adjustments, to strategize. And this is really the level that this path takes place on. A lot of the time we think that people who can enter deep states are doing it through magical methods that no one can really understand. But actually, a good portion of it, more I think than people would prefer to believe, is practical in the way that you're discussing. It's the reason I talk about posture so much, is that these are very practical adjustments we can make. Of course, if you want, you can put yourself in difficult situations, sit in the sun, and see if you can still make adjustments to your breath to keep you alert. If you want, you can increase the challenge level like that. And that's another way of strategizing, but it's not necessary. And so to make those kinds of adjustments is very good. And I appreciate that you bring it up for the group, because sometimes those sorts of it's quite common for those kinds of changes to be seen as so mundane, so banal. It's kind of depressing. That's not real meditation if all you're doing is moving into the shade. I want something that changes the whole universe, right? But that's the level that the practice actually happens on, and it's important for us to accept that. Partially because that's just how it is. So let's face it. The other is that if you initially in your practice divide those kinds of adjustments away from spiritual practice and say that isn't really spiritual, that's just mundane and meaningless, then that will have extremely negative consequences later, because then from the beginning you've practiced a path that's separate from real life, which means that whatever insights you have will be insights that are separate from your real life. And that creates real problems later. Does that make sense? You want a path that includes getting up and moving into the shade, because you want a path that includes that informs your life at that level. Otherwise, later on, when we have a deep experience, it won't change our lives at the practical level. So I appreciate the report.
In line with this conversation about posture, I've been thinking a lot about how to make meditation accessible to perhaps people who aren't able-bodied. And I was wondering if you've ever worked with people that perhaps can't have the proper posture.
Yeah.
Or if you have thoughts on how to incorporate that in alternative forms.
Yeah. Again, the emphasis that we want to make, the emphasis, and this is difficult to do. This isn't so easy, but we're attempting to shift the emphasis from a correct answer to the next more useful answer. Okay, so so the question you ask is very good and actually has significance, which I'll get back to because it's important to know. But the way the question is asked is, what if someone can't have the proper posture? That looks at things from a certain angle, and the angle is that there is a proper posture which we should all be able to meet. And if you can't, then you can't have the proper posture. And that's more what I was referring to in the exercise as a location-based practice. We're trying to reach a certain state. It's different from a journey-based practice in which we're interested in exploring the next more useful posture. Now, everyone can do that. Yes? We can make those changes. Now, of course, if you could say, well, not everyone, and that's true. There are certain people who can't change their posture at all. That's true. And nonetheless, other people may be able to help us, and B, we can still make adjustments in terms of our mental posture. So we can make adjustments. That ability to make adjustments is the fundamental quality of the path, and therefore our interest becomes in what is the next adjustment to make. Yes? What is the next adjustment? So it's more of an exploration than a destination. Yes, the emphasis goes from the destination to the exploration of the next step. Now, yes, I've worked with a lot of people who aren't able to sit in the way that is typically described. And furthermore, I have often been a person who can't do that. I've had back problems, and so I wasn't able to sit up at all at times. Other times I could sit, but not well. The teacher who I've trained with primarily broke his back. He broke his vertebra, and so he's not able to sit with a straight back at all now. His back is always like this, crooked both forward and to the side. But that doesn't mean he's an incompetent meditator. Ultimately, the posture is a tool. It's something we want to use, but it's not the point of the practice. And so we make use of whatever posture we have. Sometimes that means lying down. Sometimes that means walking. Sometimes it means sitting. There are, and standing, as was mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different possibilities. And each of them, you can take certain tendencies and use them in your exploration, but the emphasis is on the exploration. What's the next thing that works for you at this time? And you shouldn't even be surprised if that changes. You make an adjustment that's working today and tomorrow it doesn't work anymore. You need to find a new one, and that's fine. Nonetheless, the point you bring up there's reason for that we have discovered that there's a certain posture, a certain way of sitting that enables our breath to function in a certain way, to flow in a certain way, and that's very helpful for having a deep and true and joyous experience. Yes. Nonetheless, you have to and so that's reasonable. That's true, and we can receive that information passed down over the centuries with gratitude. Nonetheless, all of those are tools. All of the postures, the asanas, as they say in Sanskrit, all of those are tools. They're not the point. The point is to experience sitting. That's the point. That's it. And it's interesting that certain postures allow us to experience sitting more than other postures, despite the fact that whatever way you're sitting, if you experience that, you're experiencing sitting. Yes? There's no more important thing than experiencing sitting, like having your experience of this practice, even if that's lying down. Of course, sitting here doesn't mean that you're sitting. You could be lying down. Experiencing this experience is the point. To have that experience completely is the point. That's it. All of the tools are useful, but if we elevate them to something above a tool, to the point, to the thing we're trying to create, then that becomes extremely dangerous. Partially because then we're taking a tool to be something that it's not, and partially because then we're putting the emphasis on creating something as opposed to experiencing, having a complete experience. So absolutely, there are certain instructions that we can take, but we don't want those instructions to gain precedence, to gain priority, to gain dominance over the direct experience we're having and the exploration of how to work with that experience. So that makes sense. In terms of specific points of how to make the practice accessible to people who have various limitations physically, it's so diverse. There's really nothing I can say in general about it. Different people, different bodies are very different. We all have a different body. None of us has a body like someone else's. We all have a unique experience, and therefore it's very difficult to make general statements about it. Does that make sense?
I guess I get a little confused between direct experience and the mind.
Yeah.
Recognizing.
That's good. Good. Well, to put it more accurately, it's good that it's good that you know that. Let's put it that way. It's common that that's the case, but we don't know it. So yeah, good news.
Okay.
Good news, you know.
So I'm just gonna go with it.
Yeah, go with it.
So at one point I just noticed frequently I'm more aware of the inhale than I am the exhale. So as I was doing the inhale, it became fuller to my body. And then at one point about halfway through, maybe because I relaxed, a bunch of thoughts came rushing in on the inhale. And then I recognized the exhale. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is interesting. This is sort of like surrender. That's the word I came up with that. So is it or does it matter? Is it the recognition of those things happening as the mind, but I still have the direct experience, obviously?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That's a very good way to put it. The recognition of those things is your mind, but you still have the direct experience of it. I like that. It's also good to note that it's the case, yes, that we didn't plan out you to say that, right? We didn't meet beforehand and I gave you a script or anything like that, right? You just gave that report directly from your own experience, unprompted, correct? Good. So the way you describe it is the classic case, as it's put in the tradition that I trained primarily in the Zen school of Buddhism. The way you put it is exactly how most people seem to experience it. Which is to say that we start out being unable to tell the difference between thinking about breathing and breathing. The direct experience of breathing and the experience of thinking about the direct experience of breathing are not distinguishable. We can't distinguish them. And so we can't distinguish them. Yes? It's important to notice that that's a stage. So if you ask the person, can you distinguish them? They may say yes, but they can't. Okay? The next stage is that you realize, oh, I can't distinguish them. That's highly significant as a step. Then the next point is realizing that in general, we think on the inhale. And therefore, if we're unable to get out of thinking about breathing, the inhale is actually a more accessible part of the breath, as it was for you. And so we go from just thinking about the breath to having an entry point into a direct experience of the breath with the inhale. As we do that, we become even more clear and then realize, oh, this actually is the experience of inhaling. It's not a thought. At that moment, suddenly it's as if we have a flood of thoughts. Not that the thoughts have increased at that moment, but because for the first time you could distinguish them, and so the thoughts become apparent. Does that make sense? Having done that, you now have an entry point into the direct experience of breathing. You sink into that, and then out of nowhere, the exhale turns up. Suddenly you realize you exhale also. The exhale becomes a tangible experience. And you discover that the exhale is actually a much easier part of the breath to concentrate on because you tend to surrender on the exhale as opposed to grab onto things. What do you tend to grab onto? Thoughts, because you're a human being. So the exhale allows you to surrender, it allows you to let go, and then the emphasis is put on the exhale in terms of the progress on the path, and then you work simply on maintaining that level of surrender on the inhale. And then you can deepen the surrender on the next exhale. And then you go from there. It keeps going. Yes, you just, if you look at the path, then you've described this much, and you just keep going, but everything you described is almost as if you found a script and read it. And so know that it's very normal and very exciting experience you had in that hour. So you're on the right track. Just keep going. That's how it works. Just keep going and going and going, and it'll keep on changing. But again, the reason I bring it up, that we didn't meet beforehand, even though obviously we didn't. The reason I bring it up is that it's proof that you don't. It comes back to the previous question that Clarabelle asked, unless I'm mistaken. Yes, and you correct me if I'm not understanding. But people have passed down this information, typically person to person, orally, but sometimes in written form. And so we have it. We know about posture. We know about breathing because people have talked about it and it's been recorded one way or another. However, you don't need it. You can directly experience this. You can directly explore this. You can directly discover this. Yes? Which is very encouraging because it actually validates the reports that have come down. Right? That you had that experience is confirmation that those people had an understanding of what we experience when we do this. Right? That they wrote it down is confirmation that you're on the right path as well, because they could take it even further than you just described, right? So it gives us a sense that this is a primarily mystical or experience-based tradition, as opposed to a doctrinal or belief-based tradition, where you're just told you have to believe, you have to see it this way. On the contrary, if you don't know how you're supposed to see it and you still see it the same way that someone else discovered, then both are validated. Both are verified and confirmed. Does that make sense? So that should give us a sense of confidence in our own experience and also in other people's exploration as well. Does that make sense? So you want to ultimately keep your own direct experience, your own direct exploration as your core, as the center. And as you do that, you come to see that, I want to put this the wrong way, but you come to see how totally confused you really are. Yeah. And so you start to appreciate everything that's been passed down as a kind of a help, as a crutch, as training wheels. But you should never then elevate what's been passed down to something more important than your own exploration. to the extent that you hold yourself to that expiration, you actually have more and more gratitude for what's been handed down, for the traditions. Does that make sense? Because you see, I really am confused at a deeper level than I ever suspected. And therefore, I'm grateful for this. But that doesn't mean that we then just grab onto it and say, well, then it must be right because I don't know anything. So I'm just going to try to make my experience be the way they say it's supposed to be. It's a tricky balance. Did you have your hand up?
I was just, I guess, thinking on the same lines. It was helpful to me when you said to distinguish between your thoughts as something you see or hear, as opposed to just experiencing breathing.
As something you feel in your body.
Yeah, something I feel in my body. And up until then, I was really fighting with you saying, don't think about it, because that's like saying, don't think about a barrel full of monkeys and it comes to mind.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's useful to have that distinction because then you see that thoughts are tangible objects. So if you know, and I could say, don't think about a barrel full of monkeys, and then you might not know how to not do that, and so you would do it. But I could also say, you know, I could tell you to look over there and say, you see that there's a friend's library behind you. Why don't you look? Okay. Yes, and now I can tell you, don't look at that. And you're perfectly capable of not doing it. In the same way, you can tell me, don't think of a barrel full of monkeys, and I don't. It's no problem at all because I just look away from that thought. The thought can be present, but I don't look at it. Does that make sense? Same way the library is present, but you're not looking at it. So once thoughts become tangible objects, it's easy. It turns out it's just as easy to turn away from a thought as it is to turn away from the friend's library. It's amazing, but it's true. If a thought isn't a tangible object, if we haven't identified what it is, that it's an object that you see or hear, if you haven't located it, then it becomes very difficult. And so that's why that distinction is so useful. Because once you distinguish it as something you can see or hear, you just turn away from what you're seeing and hearing to your body, which you can do, right? Now you may find that as you're walking around the room again and again, you look at the friend's library, right? It could happen. If you had been that walking period, you could have been walking around the room. Then you might have seen it again and again, but every time you see it, you just turn away again. And you have then turned away and you're not looking at it again, right? The same way as you're practicing, you may again and again notice a thought about breathing, but again and again, you turn away from that. You turn to another experience. And so the active turning to an experience that you have defined is just as important as turning away from an experience that you have defined. Does that make sense? And so suddenly the instruction that you hear throughout the traditions, not just Buddhist traditions, but the world traditions, about go beyond thinking, experience directly, not mere thinking. Suddenly those instructions go from being infuriating because they seem infeasible. It's not possible. Why are you telling me to do that? I can't do it. To merely one more thing that you do, like turning away from that place behind you, or like putting down it's not hard for me to put that down. I can put it down. It's not difficult, right? The same way to put down a thought becomes not difficult. You can do it. It's something that you can do. Doesn't mean that you would always do it. There are times when I should hold this, right? Right? Times when it's appropriate to hold this and use it. Same way there are times when it's appropriate to hold and use a thought. Other times you put it down. And so this practice teaches us that the friend's library is an object that you can look at and you can look away from. A thought is an object, like right now, barrel full of monkeys. I can turn towards that. I can look at it. Interesting enough, this barrel is, for some reason I don't know, transparent. I can see them in the barrel. It must be a plastic barrel or glass barrel. I can see them. They're playing around in there. You know, they're bananas and balls and stuff, and some of them are enjoying it and some of them are not. So I can see that, and I can just as well turn away from it. So I've turned away from it. I'm not seeing it. Even while I'm saying it, I can say these words and continue to turn my attention towards a different object that I'm continuing to attend to. And that becomes simply a skill that we develop.
Well, I thought that just those words clicked.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
It made it a much more powerful experience.
Yeah, great. Good job. Good job. Very good. They may have clicked for you also because you were working with it, right? It's not merely the words, but it's also your practice that made the words click. Well, that's very good.
Well, I won't worry you with going on about what an awakening experience I had.
Oh, did you have an awakening experience tonight?
No.
Oh, really? That would not be boring. Not at all.
I can't see how much time there is.
Oh, none.
Oh, okay.
I was too busy looking at the barrel full of monkeys to look at the clock. So we should stop there. Thanks for mentioning that. I appreciate that. So this is a time when we can talk about responsibility, about what things we can do in order to make the world a better place. Not only do we do this partially to share. We have this tradition of sharing opportunities to serve, partially in order to share, but partially in order to make it part of our weekly routine to try to find things to share. In order to share something, we first have to find it. And so we're trying to encourage all of us to look out for things that we can do, places we can put our time and energy to make the world a better place, to change the structures of our society so that we resolve suffering in that way, in a conditional sense, as well as the unconditional sense that we practice in meditation. So are there some events, some activities that we can engage in this week to make the world a better place?
So there's one from that we found at CEDAR. So there is a petition to not let the national service become extinct. So things like AmeriCorps, the Peace Corps, sort of thing. So you can sign that. I believe you can find it in the document that we have that collects all these things. So every week with your Sunday Sit email, you get a link at the bottom of the email to a living document that you and we can add opportunities like that too. So you can read a more extended description there and also click links and follow through.
Right. Excellent. Anything else?
I think this is an interesting thing, and you can find the information for it and the link to it on the Peace and Justice Center's website, but all across the state, in different places, people are reading aloud Frederick Douglass's speech from 1852, in which he took exception to being asked to commemorate the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And obviously he was a great man, and I think especially in these times that we have with so much oppression and everything else, I think it's kind of an interesting thing that they're doing it all across the state. And there is one in Burlington, but it's a little further into July. There was one today. There's all different dates.
Great. Great. Maybe we could put that in our document as well. it up. So it's even easier to find. Anything else?
We have some good stuff going on at CML right now. We actually have a new resident and some interns this summer. You want to stand up and introduce yourself? That'd be great.
Hello, my name is Christopher. I'm the new resident at CML. I'm not entirely sure if there's anything else I should say.
Tell us where you're from.
Oh, from Illinois, born in Chicago, grew up slightly outside of there in Fox River Grove. And yeah, really loving CML and everything that people do, as well as Soryu's teachings. It's been very good so far.
Welcome.
Good to be here.
Is it hard?
At times, but I'm learning a lot of skills to work with difficulty. So even hard becomes easy, I suppose. I don't know. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we're grateful to have you. And yeah, if you want to stand up and introduce yourselves real quick.
Hello, I'm Clarabelle. I'm from Southern California and I currently live in Northern California. I go to school in Rhode Island at Brown University and I'm interns. Having a lovely summer here. I didn't really have much of an idea of like what it would be like, but what it's been like so far has been really exciting and interesting and challenging mentally and sometimes physically. A lot of physical moving and stuff, but every part of it has been a great growing experience. Hi, I'm Benedita and I live in New York. I just graduated from Emory University and CML is definitely a new experience for me, but it's nevertheless a new learning experience. So I'm definitely gaining a lot of valuable skills from it.
My name is Pierre. I'm from Orlando, Florida. I also just recently graduated from Emory University, and I've been having a pretty interesting time. Glad I decided to come and check it out.
Really happy to have you here. And so we have a few retreat offerings coming up. This Friday evening, we have a retreat, and we have 3 spots left, actually, if you're curious about it. It's a 7-day silent retreat. On July 22nd, we have a Shinzen Young day-long retreat. It starts at noon and it'll end at 6. And he's covering the topic spaciousness.
He's the person who most effectively, in my opinion, made the delineation between seeing, hearing, and feeling in the way that you described.
And starting August 29th, and actually I just want to make sure you know, there are flyers for these out there, but this date is on the email and not on those flyers, just to make sure you know. On August 29th to September 2nd, we have the Vision Quest, which is a Native American Lakota tradition.
The Lakota do it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on September 22nd, we have a Shinzen Young week-long retreat starting. So the 22nd to the 29th. And yeah, we'd love for you to come up for any of those retreats or a meal or a visit, a couple days, a week, whatever. Yeah, be in touch if you're interested in any of that. So yeah, thanks for coming.
And it looks like I will be around for the next month or so, and then I'll be gone for about 3 months. So for the time being, for the near future, this next retreat would be the last one for the next few months. Last one you could do with me, but there are many excellent teachers, so there's no need to do a retreat with me. In any case, know that I'll be away in several weeks, and I'll enjoy being with you for that time, and then after I return in November.
Do you mind saying where you'll be?
I'll be, in order to start our next location in California. I'll be going there for a few weeks. Then I'll be going out to Whidbey Island, which is near Seattle in Washington State, to train for a month with a person I mentioned quite a bit, the Zen master who I trained under, Shodo Taigen Harada Roshi. Then I'll be coming back here and having some time in solitary retreat, returning in November to workings at CEDAR at the Monastic Academy.
Please join us for chanting. Start at 7:20 this evening.